It's an absolute joy today to introduce Mick. Although to many of you, Mick needs no introduction. To some of you, you've heard so much about him and are so looking forward to seeing him in person. A little bit of background about Mick. I don't know how you capture this in a few moments, but for many decades, Mick has been really at the forefront in the field of people development, personal development, and development of human beings, as I like to call it. He's been associated with many leading companies in his career, both here and internationally, and we are delighted. Can somebody just turn they've got a sound on with a mower or something going outside? Thank you. And he's been an associate of Lead with Humanity since 2007, and in many ways has been a mentor to the Lead with Humanity team over these years. Those of you who had the privilege of having Mick facilitate a Lead with Humanity program that you may have attended will remember that he enjoys going by the name of Umboyazi. Now, I'm going to go back into the history of where that comes from, because that in itself is a long story. But suffice to say that loosely translated, it means to come away knowing more. And that epitomizes Mick, is that anyone who interacts with him will come away knowing more. It might not be something hugely technical, but you'll learn a lot more about humanity. And there's just so much wisdom that comes out every time we share time with him. Those of you who know him well will know he is characterized by incredible warmth, care, concern, and compassion for those he interacts with, an extraordinary ability to connect with people. And his key message over the years has been absolutely that we need to be delving into the roots before we think about the fruits. That the roots, and basically what we would call our spiritual intelligence, is a fundamental factor of our life. We cannot be what we are not rooted in. And that is a real challenge to us as to what we actually are rooted in. He's a student of many disciplines, and he weaves them all together in a wonderful way. And many of these are intangible things, and that he brings to life in a very important way. For those of you who just heard about Mick on Leading with Humanity programs, and I know there's some of you on this program, just to say, is this person really a human being that we've heard so much about? That we've spoken about Mick when you know, the years since he has not been facilitating with us. Yes, he is. He's alive and well, and just wonderful to have Mick sharing today on finite versus infinite wisdom, a perfect topic for you. Mick will talk for about half an hour, and thereafter we will probably just have an open forum and discussion. If you do have questions as we go along, please just log them on the chat room, and we will pick them up as we go. Just throw them out there, either to me personally or to the group as a whole. And so Mick, over to you. We really look forward to the next half an hour with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Pete.
We've got you, Mick.
I'm just trying to open the screen to share screen. Right, can you see a title there called Finite versus Infinite Leadership?
Perfect.
Perfect. Great, thank you very much, Pete, for such a humbling introduction. And it really is a great privilege to be able to make a contribution. And a great privilege that those of you who have set aside an hour of your time to come and do so is most appreciated as well. I'm going to introduce the finite versus infinite leadership with the actual emblem, which I'm highlighting here, of Lead with Humanity, which is the buffalo thorn. It has a Latin name, the Ziziphus macronata. It has a Afrikaans name, Hakensteek. It has a Zulu name, which is Mpaga. So basically, you will have, if you are on the program, know that this is a bush that grows in the African bush, and it has a finite aspect as the hook, and opposite is a spike, which is the infinite. So in the Zulu culture of the Mpapa, the hook is representing your memory, the finite aspects of what your life is to date, your gene structure, what it is you bring to the party. And at that same point, at that node, you also get the spike, which is the future. That's what you can dream about, it's your vision. It's the intangibles. So the spikes are infinite. So infinite leadership is where you're actually dealing in imagination and creativity, whereas the spikes are where you're dealing with the finite issues. And to say that this is finite versus infinite is about as crazy as saying that it is a left brain versus right brain that we have in our heads. Because as you all know, it's actually a whole brain that counts. And same with leadership, it's the ability to tap into both of these finite and infinite components. And at that node also is the leaf, which has three veins on it. You've got it's about relationship, your relationship with self, your relationship with creator, your relationship with others. And that is very much what you choose to call, let's just go back one, creator. I think this is a better picture to actually understand the Sisyphus Macronata, because this is, in reality, it's not a defined, it comes in every node actually has another direction. So every time you hit one of these nodes in life, where you'll find out you get hooked and you stop, you tend to have to think, okay, from whence here? You get born, you come into life, you go to school, these are all little hooks that suddenly happen and you change the way you do things. You get a job, you get married, you have children, all of these would reflect in the Sisyphus. The real infinite component of it came through to me from who introduced it to me was Delani Mtimbu, who I think may be online today too. He actually showed that it's not a beginning and end. You can see there's no start or finish here. It's actually represents, so even your last little hook, which is probably the end of life, then becomes ancestral or something else. And even before the bottom here, what were you before you were born? A seed and an idea. And they very easily mix those kind of so-called paradoxical concepts into one greater outcome, a more synergistic outcome. So even when a person dies and the Mpapa is taken to the funeral, they actually carry the spirit of the person who's died to be back with the connections with other family. And it's a very, very good symbol for us to start our discussion. I'm going to talk probably 5 different metaphors just to make the points. They will vary. Some are African, like this one is, and also the Baobab Tree that Pete's already introduced you to. And it is, you can see in the infinite solutions, it's both finite and infinite in the one word. Now, the story of the Baobab is that many, many millions of years ago, before there were humans or animals, there were just trees. And Baobab was suddenly born, and he looked around and he was quite alarmed. So he pointed up to the maker and said, "Great Spirit, I have a problem." "And what is your problem?" asked Great Spirit. He said, "My problem is that I can just see millions of other trees. I want to be unique. I want to be something different." So Great Spirit said, "That's fine." And he leant down and he pulled him out by his roots, turned him upside down, and put him back in the ground. So Baobab looked up again and he said, "Great Spirit, yes, what's your problem now?" "My problem is that my roots are the same as my fruits. When I look now, you put my roots above the ground, but in this tree, the roots look like fruits, and I'm just like everybody else." No, no, said Great Spirit, because you have been prepared to take your roots, what cannot be seen, out from under the ground and reveal them in your fruits, you will become greater than other trees. You will survive in the dry rivers of Limpopo and the Zambezi. You will last thousands of years with your fruited trees, because even animals, when they come and elephants try to ringbark you, it will not happen. So it's a very good, as Pete's already introduced, this roots before fruits, human being before human doing. So let's turn back upside down again. And he said also, you will become the tree of life. You will be the African hourglass, because you prepare to turn yourself upside down whenever everything's feeling good and your fruits are good. It's the time to take a look at those roots again and say, to what extent am I fulfilling my potentialities? And it's that constant turning over of the baobab that makes it a human being before human doing, and constantly referring back. So when we get here, we actually now, the name that Pete mentioned, the Umbuyazi, is to come away knowing more, and that's the learning organization, a name that Shaka Zulu, king of seven generations ago, gave to the first Finn who came here from the north of the continent. I think he was, I see there's some Finns here, which is nice, because I've never got to Finland. To Denmark, beautiful, but the Finns are, they came from, I think Finn meaning fair. It meant that they came from probably Viking origins, and then the ships coming around the Cape, one of those got captured back in 1803, and the Finns were here. So that was, they were early people to meet the Natal king, and that was a praise song that he gave to him. So here is our baobab tree, and you'll see I'm just going to try and color with the same. This one's got a few more leaves than Pete's had, but importantly on this one, you can also see the actual seed. So it's not only the cream of tartar fruits, this is the cream of tartar fruit, it's also seed before roots, before fruits. So it's where you come from before you become a root to become a fruit. It's dealing with that level of intangibles. And it's in that we actually find that Taylor de Chardin's quote, and it's the one that Covey uses in his, and I see Nicola had a similar one to begin our presentation, where this Taylor de Chardin philosopher says, we are not human beings having a spiritual experience, but in fact we're spiritual beings having a human experience. So that's suggesting that the infinite almost has to be bigger in the way that we looking at life. It certainly needs to be as much the same as just the finite. And we'll look at that in a number of different ways, because as you dig for roots, you're going to find this Sotho word sariti, meaning shadow attributes. It's about digging for your roots so that you can actually find your fruits. So this shadow would reflect, like the baobab, the part of us that's under the ground that cannot be seen, our roots. That's what you need to turn above the ground and wear your heart on your sleeve to actually be passionate and energized by what you really meant to be. And authenticity is constantly checking that. So that's what we're calling your dignified potential. It's that dignity that arises from really deep seeking of meaningful conditions. And I must congratulate the Finns on winning for the third consecutive year, I believe, the happiest nation on earth. And when asked why that was, a quote I saw was that you can only live a meaningful life if you are developing the meaning of life for others. So the whole basis of that quote was that what really makes it the happiest nation on earth is that their interactions, their connectedness with others is related to others' developments. And that is hugely relevant in our world today. So let's go through our senses and see how maybe these different ways of raising. I'm just looking at urban versus rural sort of background. So let's say in the urban today, you have taste that tend to be fast foods, tend to be a quick burger. You know, there's that sort of food that you have. That might be called, I know left brain and right brain are not separate, but let's call it that finite kind of left brain approach to life. Whereas on the right, you have here much more natural fruits. We had thousands of mango trees on our farm. That's how we kind of grew up, was in that sort of world. Touch, what you're touching from being a child from the day you're born are Lego toys, Fisher-Price toys, things that are developing the conceptual mind to do things in straight lines. Whereas when you are growing up in a more rural environment, you're in nature and things are not that orderly. You'll be fine. You could focus on a dewdrop and wonder what's in that little crystal diamond of it's a real fantasy world that you can live in. Sight, everything in the tends to be straight lines, high buildings, traffic. It's that sort of busy world versus on the right here, a meandering river, much more conducive to peace and quiet, let's say. With smell, it's about, we tend to have I suppose, a lot of pollution in a lot of places in urban site settings. We have a lot of perfumes to try and compensate some of the smells we deal with. But in nature, what you can smell are real flowers and the abundance and the way they interconnect with the whole environment around them far easier. And then finally, I think on the hearing, we tend to hear traffic. We hear lots of loud noise, maybe taxis even with big, loud subwoofers. And in the more quiet world of the bush, you tend to find maybe waterfalls making a bit of thunder. Smoke that thunders, they call the Victoria Falls. But you also have the call of bird calls. You have silence, quiet, solitude. And that's very much where this kind of thinking of the infinite leadership comes from. You've had many articles on the need for solitude and silence. But then the question arises, what about the sixth sense? Where does intuition come from? And again, here with the original peoples, take the San Bushmen, for instance, their actual ability, the intuitive sixth sense is more likely to be derived from the right brain development than the left, or certainly equally as. And Steve Hall will have shown you that as a tracker. Definitely their ability to get into the mind and to actually see holistically and sustainably the way they're living, not overeating or robbing the planet of too many resources. They really lived sustainably. It's the same, I think the Oscar award to Craig, the octopus teacher, that was an amazing attribute to this kind of thinking as well, that having gone in and written books and taken photos of the sand and their ability to connect with nature, if they actually act out the animal before they take on its shape and size, they bring it back. They have a huge body to celebrate its contribution by allowing them to eat it for their sustaining together, much more respectful. And Craig said in his interview, or even in the movie that won the Oscar, that he actually, it was from those Bushmen that he learned he needed to get under the sea and try and really understand, like the octopus. So it's a kind of great leadership to me, in that here's a man who won't even go and collect his Oscar because he found it very difficult, the amount of time Netflix had to demand camera work and so on, and all the finite things that had to be done to produce such a movie were taking him away from his true love, which is to connect with nature. And he needs to get back to nature to find out what his next assignment should be. It's that sort of level of authenticity that maybe our world needs to work towards. So here's our, if you'll excuse one picture of our family, this is myself in the middle. at age probably about 4, I suppose. And my elder brother Hugh, who's on the site here too, he's 2 years older. And on the right, the younger Paddy, who is 2 years younger, turned 70 tomorrow, the day after. So here's how we grew up. We were in a pole and dogger hut for our first 6 years. These are poles, and the dogger is this mud that you throw against these holes in the wall, because through the dry, cold winter, the mud falls out and the wind blows bitterly cold through those gaps. So there are puppies here. We've grown up with animals around. So we're having very much that sort of right brain rural upbringing that I've mentioned. We did go to school. We can see the buildings are now becoming a bit squarer. High technology here was a mealie planter, which is a maize, the pits in the one and the fertilizer in the other, so that you could go down the lanes and plant. But we went to school and even had toys that showed there were London buses and things like that somewhere else in the world where there was traffic and so on. So very privileged to actually have had that kind of experience of growing up in nature. And it was a great help to get to what I'm going to jump to suddenly is the Japanese Ikigai, you might have heard of, which is a philosophy which the oldest people living on Earth on this island in Japan, lots of them over 90, are also almost as happy as the Finns. They win the longevity award, certainly, and meaningful lives that they live. And the summary of their philosophy is that you must do what you love, you must do what you get paid for, makes you some money, and you do what you're good at. And finally, the final ball is all about what the world needs. So you dig into this a bit, you start digging for roots, like we say, you've got to go down. So when you take what you love and what you're good at, you find that's your passion, okay? Whereas what you love and what the world needs is more of a mission. It starts to become your life mission. Likewise down here, what you're good at and what you're paid for tends to be your profession. You become an accountant, you become a lawyer, whatever your profession is. Whereas if you're doing what you paid for, but also what the world needs, we're then looking more at the vocation side of it. So you now have a vocation. If you're coming down this side, it's more mission and vocation that the world might be demanding at present. And they even take it a step deeper. I'll just skim it. If you take the opposite, so that's reflecting these three, what it means is you're not representing so much that one. So the behavior you experience often is satisfaction, because you're doing what you love, what you're good at and what you're paid for, but you're feeling a bit useless and that you're not contributing what the world needs. Down here, you are not, it's the love that you're depriving a little because you're doing those three, so you're comfortable, but you could have a feeling of emptiness because you haven't got that love. Up top here, you're missing what you paid for, so you can see there at the bottom you end up with all the good stuff except for no wealth. And finally over here, opposite there, what you're missing is what you're good at. So that makes you feel a little more insecure because you're not actually that competent at what you do. But again, it's all four of those overlapping that brings us to the Ikigai, which is Ikigai at the center. And that is kind of your balanced living. If you can have what you love, what you're good at, what you've been paid for, and I'd suggest that the infinite leadership is moving us more in this direction. It's saying for sustainability, you need to move not only for what made profession and you were getting a good life, finite life from, we need now to have much more life missions, which lead to vocations, which actually do the sustainable things to the world that is required. So coming back to being a human being before human doing, we see that this would be Stephen Covey's way of evaluating. He says we're physical, which is how we live, emotional, how we love, mental, how we learn, and spiritual is the legacy we leave. So that's how some of the programs I've run, they said, no, that's too complicated. We really are just body, heart, mind, and spirit. And really it's about our potential, which is our 4 Qs. So what we get to now is cutting the tree in half almost to understand what are the 4 Qs. Being a human being before a human doing means we need to look at what our potentialities are. So the Qs are your quotients. You know, the PQ is basically your skeletal nervous system, the way your body's hung together, how fit you're keeping, what you're eating. Those are the sort of things that make your skeletal nervous system work. And you'll all know IQ because that's kind of how much intelligence you're using to be able to serially align information and return it and get higher qualification. So very high correlation here to academic success. And then you get the SQ, which Pete mentioned, spiritual quotient. You can read for soul spirit because it's the same thing in this language. And this was first pursued that I saw from Dr. Ian Marshall. He was Mr. Ian Marshall because he was a psychiatrist. And he showed that there was a 40 hertz potential ion exchange that takes place when people are at a very restful state. People in yoga, people in transcendental meditation, maybe fishing, maybe singing, maybe dancing, whatever your thing is. Runners find it in the runner's gap where you suddenly just, you know, that feeling when you just totally chilled, and that's regenerating spirit as well. And then finally, we all know that EQ is a higher correlate since Goldman, to the successes of leadership, successes of life, lower divorce rates there. So this is much more networking of neural systems. So here you are serially aligned neurons regurgitating. Here you are mixing, you know, it's that heart intelligence that was covered in one of the earlier lectures as well. But the main one here probably is all 4 of these balanced again in much the same way. So the 4 Qs need to be, you don't want to be so much PQ that you just can talk about your smelly comrades' taggies from running so much, or your happy clapper lost experience at church, or your professor with so many degrees, or socially in the heart, how many people you'd met, what parties you'd been to, and so on. It's really a balance of all 4, and to look at yourself and say, what is this Q about? And Q to me is quiet. It's the quotient, it's the talents you have, but it's really saying, find it in solitude and quietness. And at the end, Nicola's put all these concepts together in a nice little 1-page thing where we can look at our past, our present, our future, and just take maybe 15 minutes a week over the next 4 weeks to dig into that Q and just see if you're managing to do things differently. I think you'll find it makes the difference. So we need to stop seeking a destination or a milestone and enter that infinite journey. And there you'll find the dignified potentials from Mother Earth. And I call this concept, which I'm not going to cover here, but it's a thought that I'd like to just introduce of the sort of thinking we need to be doing to actually tackle the real first, third world kind of problems. Ubuntu, you all know, comes from Ubuntu Ngemuntu Ngabantu. Ubuntu is a person. Ngemuntu is only a person. Ngabantu, insofar as other people see you. So it's about how you are perceived by others. It's a very communal way, and it says your only mirror is basically when you look in the eyes of another. It's your relationships that make who you are. And EQ is at the core of that. And on the other side, on the finite side, you've got more of the equity, and that's more than just equity in the stock exchange, shareholder equity. It's about equal, and it's about quality as well. And it's how do we find on the seesaw around EQ, how do we seesaw the balance of Ubuntu living where everybody has a go, and equity where everybody gets a slice of the benefits of doing it correct. Those are the leadership components that we require so desperately now. So I hope that gives enough sort of thought of what the difference might be. here you can see when you're all 7 billion to 10 billion people digging to the center of the earth for your roots. Hopefully that makes a world where it's really, it's a world where you have, it's both high tech and it's high tech and high touch. What we're advocating in Lead with Humanity is to get that high touch balance up so that the high tech that's suddenly been foisted even more on us with COVID, that we can actually really reap the benefits of that. But you've got to have a balance. It's high touch and high tech need to go together. So the high tech, you can have Mr. Elon Musk is putting a lot more SpaceX out there, so we can see all those things happening. But it really at the moment is a special time because it was full moon yesterday, and it's the time when you can actually, especially here, we were standing watching the waves break with the moon meandering in the waves as they broke, and you're watching the sun go down at the same time. So here we are, the moon is relying on us as the body to go around, and there's the sun that we are part of the planets that are passing around that. And equally, you can go into other galaxies and see that there are black holes looking here, and we're floating around all of those. So it keeps all those perspectives of what the world needs, a better perspective of what sustainability means. So what I'm going to ask Nicola to show is just a little exercise that maybe we can look at. Thanks, Nick. This is your empty canvas that I'd like you to, and she's going to put it in a special way where you can evidently just print it out. She'll be able to explain that next. But I'm just wanting you to reflect on your past, consider your present, and envision your future. So in that first sort of box, I want you to just think of maybe what are some of your untapped genetic talents, what your dignified potential is, and what is your 4Q balance like at the moment. How is your body, heart, mind, and spirit reacting to the talents that it's there to give? And I haven't mentioned the Mayan Indians. They have this philosophy that unless you are looking 7 generations back and 7 generations forward, you're not really living a meaningful life. So that means you've got to look at your grandfather's grandfather's father, which is where I took it back into the Vikings and the Finns, and say, what sort of genes do I get? And we know that genes change now, even as we live, and we can change our genetic structures but if we're sitting in that versus the finite versus infinite, you're going to be exerting cortisone kind of chemicals in your amygdala and hippocampus. Whereas if you manage to get to the more dopamine and serotonin kind of chemicals that come out of your executive frontal brain, it's going to come out of digging back into that history. And all of us, if we go back that many generations, we're probably much more closely connected to nature. So there, as we stood last night watching those waves, you realize you've come from generationally, just a feeling gets to you of watching the power of nature. And that's what you see. You who've been on the game drives in Pindar and seen the stars in the southern sky, that is huge. So dig into that, tap it, because the world of the present so often stops that reflection on the past and your potentials. So your present is really to say, how are you using both the finite and the infinite to optimize your leadership potential? And then just give yourself some time to envision that future. What creative, innovative dreams can you dare to make reality? And I was pleased to see with the summary I got of Senec's Infinite book, that's what he says, that in the infinite leadership that you find innovation, creativity, and those desirable, intangible asset attributes. And I'm suggesting you do it on these funny dates, 2nd of June, 10th of June, 18th of June, 24th of June, because that would represent, I tend to do it in lunars. So that is, full moon was now, so 2nd of June is about as soon as you can get to that. And it's a special full moon at the moment. Try and look at it tonight. It comes up at 8:30 tonight, I think. Comes up an hour later every night. but it's actually at perigee. It's actually the closest to Earth that it's going to be, and it's under 400,000 kilometers, which is close in space to Earth. 10th of June will be the third quarter. 18th of June will be the half moon, and then you'll be back to final quarter. And by the time you have the next last Thursday of the month, you will have spent 15 minutes on each of those days of quiet time. Please go to your quietest, most meditative spot that you can. Just have a look at what you scribbled in these 3 lines at the last one. Read the 3 blocks. Does what you've written still apply? And then schedule the time to pursue what you need to do, and then do it. Simple as that. But I think if we follow just that very simple process, one would find in the matter of a month that a whole lot of different outcomes are happening in terms of your perspective, what you need to do in a meaningful, both finite and infinite leadership. Thank you.